June 1944, the hedgerows of Normandy had become one of the most dangerous battlefields in Europe. Narrow country lanes wound between thick earthen embankments covered with centuries-old vegetation, creating a maze where visibility rarely extended beyond a few hundred meters. Every bend in the road could conceal an anti-tank gun, a Panther waiting in ambush, or a squad of infantry carrying Panzerfausts. American Sherman tanks advanced cautiously through this landscape, often unable to see the enemy until the first shot had already been fired. For German tank crews, these ambushes frequently ended with a familiar sight. A Sherman erupted in flames or came to a halt with smoke pouring from its engine compartment. From inside the German gunner's sight, the result seemed obvious. Another American tank had been destroyed. Another enemy crew had been eliminated. Another victory had been secured. Yet only days later, sometimes even the next morning, German crews would encounter what appeared to be the very same Sherman fighting once again. To many German veterans, it became one of the most frustrating mysteries of the Western Front. At first, some crews blamed poor battlefield observation. Perhaps the tank they believed they had destroyed had actually escaped. Perhaps another Sherman from the same unit simply occupied a similar position. Perhaps confusion during combat made it impossible to identify individual vehicles accurately. But as the campaign continued, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Shermans that had clearly been abandoned returned to service. Damaged tanks disappeared overnight from battlefields. American armored formations recovered from losses with remarkable speed. German crews gradually realized they faced an opponent fighting a very different kind of war. The explanation was not another gun. It was not thicker armor. It was not a secret weapon. It was something far less dramatic and far more important. Behind the advancing Sherman formations came specialized armored vehicles whose mission was not to destroy German tanks, but to rescue American ones. These machines rarely attracted newspaper headlines. They did not participate in famous armored charges or dramatic tank duels. They carried no massive high-velocity cannon capable of defeating Tigers at long range. Yet they quietly ensured that hundreds of damaged American tanks returned to combat instead of becoming permanent battlefield wrecks. These were the American Armored Recovery VehicleS. Allied soldiers. They represented engineering and logistics. Many German tank crews. They became symbols of an enemy that simply refused to stay defeated. Understanding why requires looking beyond dramatic battles and examining a part of armored warfare that rarely appears in popular histories. Most people imagine tank warfare ending the moment one vehicle knocks out another. In reality, the battle often continued long after the shooting stopped. A tank disabled on Monday might fight again on Thursday. Another might never move again despite suffering only minor damage. The difference depended less upon the tank itself than upon the army supporting it. The United States Army had spent years developing a comprehensive recovery system before large numbers of American troops entered combat in Europe. Military planners understood something many armies underestimated. Tanks were too valuable to abandon whenever they became damaged. Even vehicles that appeared completely destroyed often contained usable engines, transmissions, radios, weapons, or armor components. Others required only relatively simple repairs before returning to combat. Saving those vehicles reduced production demands while preserving experienced crews. American industry certainly possessed extraordinary manufacturing capacity, but even the largest factories could not instantly replace every battlefield loss. Recovery therefore became an essential part of operational planning. German planners appreciated this concept as well. Throughout the early years of the war, specialized recovery equipment accompanied panzer divisions. Damaged tanks were towed from battlefields whenever practical. Repair workshops restored many vehicles that otherwise would have been lost. During the campaigns in Poland, France, and the early stages of Operation Barbarossa, Germany generally succeeded in maintaining this system as long as offensives advanced. Rapidly and logistical support remained effective. Damaged tanks often returned to service. The situation changed dramatically after 1942. Germany's expanding fronts, growing fuel shortages, and increasing Allied air superiority transformed tank recovery into an increasingly dangerous and often impossible task. Heavy vehicles, such as the Tiger and Panther, presented particular difficulties. A Tiger weighed approximately 57 tons. The later King Tiger exceeded 68 tons. Recovering such massive machines frequently required multiple towing vehicles working together if enemy artillery threatened the area or fuel supplies. proved inadequate, crews sometimes had no choice but to abandon otherwise repairable tanks. American planners carefully studied these problems, rather than relying exclusively upon ordinary tanks converted temporarily into towing vehicles. They developed machines specifically designed for recovery operations. One of the earliest examples emerged from the familiar Sherman chassis itself. Known as the M31 Tank Recovery Vehicle, it replaced a standard turret with a fixed superstructure equipped with heavy lifting equipment, powerful winches, towing gear, and specialized tools. Its purpose was entirely different from that of a gun tank. Instead of advancing toward enemy fire, it followed behind armored formations, waiting until combat moved elsewhere before recovering damaged vehicles. Later came the improved M32 Recovery Vehicle. Based upon the M for Sherman chassis, the M32 incorporated stronger recovery equipment, improved lifting capability, and better towing arrangements. Its appearance immediately distinguished it from ordinary Shermans, where a normal tank carried a rotating turret with a 75 or 76 mm gun. The M32 featured an armored recovery structure supporting a large boom used for lifting engines, transmissions, and other heavy components. Powerful winches hidden inside the hull allowed crews to pull disabled tanks free from mud, shell craters, collapsed bridges, or anti-tank ditches. Additional towing equipment transformed the vehicle into a mobile workshop capable of solving mechanical problems directly on the battlefield. To American soldiers, these machines became indispensable to German observers. They represented something unexpected during the Normandy Campaign. German reconnaissance units occasionally reported unusual Sherman-based vehicles moving behind armored columns. Initially, they attracted little attention. Their lack of a conventional turret suggested limited combat capability. Most German commanders naturally focused upon tanks capable of firing back rather than support vehicles remaining behind the front. Only gradually did they recognize their true significance. The recovery vehicles rarely appeared during major engagements. Instead, they arrived afterward as darkness fell or fighting shifted elsewhere. Recovery crews ventured cautiously onto battlefields still littered with wrecked vehicles. Working under constant danger from artillery, mines, snipers, and unexploded ammunition, they attached towing cables to damaged Shermans before hauling them toward repair areas farther behind the lines. The work demanded extraordinary courage. Contrary to popular imagination, recovery operations seldom occurred in safety. Battlefields remained hazardous long after shooting subsided. Disabled tanks often rested within range of enemy artillery. Minefields surrounded many wrecks. Burning ammunition occasionally detonated without warning. Recovery crews nevertheless continued working because every tank they saved represented one less replacement vehicle required from factories in the United States. German soldiers watching through binoculars occasionally witnessed these operations. At first, the activity seemed puzzling. Why risk valuable vehicles and trained crews attempting to recover tanks already destroyed? From the German perspective, battlefield recovery had become increasingly rare precisely because operational circumstances seldom permitted it. American forces appeared willing to accept risks that German units could no longer afford. The results soon became obvious. Damaged Shermans disappeared within days. American armored strength recovered surprisingly quickly. German intelligence officers began noting that reported American tank losses frequently failed to produce corresponding long-term reductions in combat capability. Something kept replacing those supposedly destroyed vehicles. The answer often lay not inside American factories, but inside nearby repair depots. American maintenance doctrine divided damaged tanks into several categories. Some required only minor repairs achievable near the front. Others demanded replacement engines, transmissions, suspension components, or weapons. Still others had suffered catastrophic damage beyond economical repair. Recovery teams attempted retrieving nearly every vehicle regardless of condition. Even tanks too badly damaged for rebuilding provided spare parts useful for repairing others. Nothing valuable remained abandoned unnecessarily. This philosophy contrasted sharply with Germany's increasingly desperate circumstances. German maintenance units certainly attempted recovering damaged Panthers and Tigers whenever possible. However, fuel shortages, air attacks, collapsing transportation networks, and shrinking manpower increasingly prevented successful operations. By late 1944, many German crews destroyed their own disabled tanks with demolition charges simply to prevent capture. Watching American vehicles disappear from battlefields while German tanks remained burning wrecks proved deeply discouraging. The difference became especially noticeable after large engagements. Following intense fighting, fields across Normandy often contained dozens of disabled armored vehicles. Within several days, American wrecks had frequently vanished. German vehicles often remained exactly where they had stopped. Allied engineers recovered their own equipment with systematic efficiency. Destroyed German tanks gradually became permanent landmarks scattered across the countryside. American armored recovery doctrine rested upon careful organization rather than improvisation. Each armored division included dedicated maintenance units equipped specifically for recovery work. Mechanics accompanied combat formations, recovery. Vehicles remained positioned where they could respond quickly. Supply depots stocked replacement components in enormous quantities. Transportation units moved engines, transmissions, road wheels, tracks, radios, and countless smaller parts wherever needed. The recovery vehicle represented only one element within a much larger logistical network. German observers slowly recognized this. Recovering a tank accomplished little unless repair facilities awaited it. Repair facilities required spare parts. Spare parts demanded reliable transportation. Transportation depended upon fuel. Fuel required uninterrupted supply lines. Every element supported every other. The recovery vehicle merely served as the visible face of an industrial system operating behind the battlefield. This realization altered how some German commanders viewed American armored warfare previously. Many dismissed Shermans as technically inferior to Panthers or Tigers. Individually, that assessment often contained truth. The Panther generally possessed superior frontal armor and an exceptionally powerful 75mm high-velocity gun. The Tiger's famous 88mm cannon remained among the most feared anti-tank weapons of the war. Yet technical superiority alone no longer guaranteed lasting battlefield success. Destroying one Sherman mattered less if it returned 3 days later. Losing one Panther mattered far more if it never fought again despite suffering repairable damage. Several German veterans later recalled the psychological effect this created. A successful engagement no longer produced the same satisfaction. Crews occasionally joked bitterly that American tanks possessed extra lives. Others remarked that the enemy seemed capable of repairing almost anything. Although exaggerated, such comments reflected genuine frustration. The battlefield itself appeared to favor the Americans in ways extending far beyond simple numbers. American recovery crews also developed remarkable skill under combat conditions. They learned how to approach damaged tanks without exposing themselves unnecessarily. Winch cables allowed recovery vehicles to remain partially concealed while pulling disabled Shermans from dangerous positions. Smoke screens sometimes protected operations. Night recovery reduced exposure to enemy observation. Every successful mission increased experience for future operations. The crews became specialists whose battlefield contributions rarely received public recognition despite their enormous importance. German recovery personnel displayed equal courage. The difference lay elsewhere. WWII 1944 and 1945. Germany increasingly lacked the resources supporting their bravery. A recovery vehicle without fuel remained useless. Mechanics without replacement parts accomplished little. Towing a damaged Panther several kilometers meant nothing if workshops lacked engines or transmissions necessary for repair. Strategic shortages transformed recoverable tanks into permanent losses. American industry moved in precisely the opposite direction. Factories produced replacement components on a scale almost unimaginable elsewhere. Liberty ships carried those supplies across the Atlantic continuously. Railroads delivered them efficiently throughout France after the Allied breakout from Normandy. Truck convoys completed the final journey toward frontline maintenance units when an M32 recovery vehicle arrived beside a disabled Sherman. It represented not merely one specialized machine, but the leading edge of an enormous logistical system, stretching all the way back to factories in Detroit, Chicago, and countless other American industrial centers. German tank crews seldom saw that vast network. What they saw instead was far more immediate. They destroyed Shermans. The Shermans disappeared. Then they came back. At first glance, it seemed almost impossible. Over time, they began to understand that they were fighting not just American tank crews, but an entire maintenance organization designed to ensure that even damaged vehicles continued contributing to the war effort. The recovery vehicle became its most visible symbol. Ironically, these unassuming machines rarely fired a shot in anger. Yet they quietly undermined the effectiveness of every successful German anti-tank engagement. Every Sherman they pulled from a muddy field, every engine they helped replace, and every damaged vehicle they returned to action reduced the long-term impact of German battlefield victories. Before long, many experienced German crews would come to realize that knocking out an American tank was often only the beginning of the problem, because somewhere behind the front line, an armored recovery vehicle was already preparing to bring their tank back into the fight. As the Allied breakout from Normandy accelerated during the summer of 1944, the battlefield itself became a proving ground for two completely different philosophies of armored warfare. German crews still judged success primarily by the number of enemy tanks destroyed during combat. American commanders measured success differently. They cared not only about how many tanks survived a battle, but how many could be returned to service after it ended. That distinction seemed subtle, yet it quietly transformed the entire campaign. Every evening, after the firing stopped, another battle began, one fought not by tank gunners, but by mechanics, recovery crews, welders, engineers, and maintenance specialists. The American recovery system functioned with remarkable precision. When a Sherman became disabled, its crew first determined whether the damage could be repaired immediately. Sometimes the problem was surprisingly minor. A broken track, damaged suspension wheel, clogged fuel line, or mechanical failure could immobilize an otherwise intact tank. If repairs proved impossible under fire, the crew abandoned the vehicle after removing classified documents, sensitive equipment, and personal weapons. The tank's exact location was then reported. Recovery officers maintained detailed records identifying damaged vehicles throughout the battlefield. Maps marked every disabled tank, noting whether it had been hit by enemy fire, suffered mechanical failure, become stuck in mud, or overturned while crossing difficult terrain. Nothing was left to chance. Once combat shifted elsewhere or darkness reduced the risk of enemy observation, recovery teams moved forward. Leading them were the M32 Tank Recovery VehicleS. Although based upon the Sherman chassis, these machines possessed a completely different appearance and purpose. The rotating turret had disappeared, replaced by an armored superstructure supporting a powerful frame boom capable of lifting heavy mechanical components weighing several tons. Massive steel cables wound around hydraulic winches hidden within the hull. Specialized towing equipment occupied nearly every available compartment. Every feature existed for one purpose: saving tanks. The M32 crew itself consisted of highly trained specialists. Unlike ordinary tank crews focused primarily upon combat, recovery personnel combined driving skills with mechanical expertise. They understood engines, transmissions, suspension systems, electrical equipment, towing procedures, welding techniques, and battlefield repair methods. Many had civilian backgrounds as mechanics before entering military service. Experience quickly made them invaluable. Approaching a disabled tank demanded careful planning. Recovery crews first examined the surrounding terrain for mines, unexploded shells, damaged bridges, hidden anti-tank obstacles, and unstable ground. They evaluated whether enemy artillery could still observe the position. Sometimes the greatest danger came not from German soldiers, but from the disabled tank itself. A Sherman destroyed by penetrating fire often contained damaged ammunition that could detonate unexpectedly. Fuel leaks created fire hazards. Bent armor plates threatened to collapse while heavy mechanical components shifted unpredictably during lifting operations. Recovery crews accepted these risks every day. Once the area appeared reasonably secure, steel towing cables were attached. The M32's powerful winch allowed crews to recover vehicles without placing the recovery vehicle directly beside the wreck. This capability proved especially valuable under enemy observation. Instead of driving fully into exposed positions, recovery crews sometimes remained partially concealed behind hedgerows, buildings, or terrain features while winching disabled tanks towards safer locations. German observers occasionally watched these operations through binoculars. Many expressed admiration for both the courage and discipline involved. Unlike ordinary supply trucks, recovery vehicles deliberately moved toward areas where tanks had already been knocked out. They entered places everyone else attempted to avoid. Nighttime became the busiest period. Under cover of darkness, columns of recovery vehicles spread across recently contested battlefields. Engines operated quietly whenever possible. Flashlights remained shielded. Orders were whispered rather than shouted. Mechanics worked rapidly because sunrise meant renewed danger from artillery and enemy patrols. The objective remained simple: recover as many vehicles as possible before daylight. Once a damaged Sherman reached the rear maintenance area, another carefully organized process began. American repair doctrine divided maintenance into several increasingly sophisticated levels. Minor repairs occurred close to the front, intermediate workshops handled larger mechanical problems, major depots farther behind the lines rebuilt severely damaged vehicles requiring extensive reconstruction. This layered system prevented unnecessary delays. A tank needing only track repairs remained near the front instead of traveling hundreds of kilometers unnecessarily. Likewise, a vehicle requiring a complete engine replacement moved directly toward facilities equipped for that work. Efficiency governed every decision. Perhaps the greatest advantage enjoyed by American mechanics lay inside wooden shipping crates stacked across maintenance depots throughout Europe. Replacement parts. American industry produced extraordinary quantities of spare components long before they became necessary. Entire engines arrived already assembled. Transmissions could be exchanged rather than repaired individually. Road wheels, drive sprockets, suspension units, final drives, machine guns, radios, optical equipment, electrical wiring, fuel pumps, and countless other parts filled warehouses stretching across liberated France. Mechanics rarely waited weeks for essential equipment. The necessary component often already sat on a nearby shelf. German maintenance officers envied this capability. Throughout 1944, Germany's industrial situation deteriorated steadily. Strategic bombing campaigns repeatedly struck factories manufacturing armored vehicle components. Railroads suffered constant interruption. Fuel shortages slowed transportation. Even when factories produced needed parts, moving them safely toward frontline repair units became increasingly difficult. Consequently, German workshops often possessed damaged Panthers awaiting transmissions, while transmissions sat hundreds of kilometers away awaiting transportation. American workshops rarely faced comparable delays. The difference extended beyond manufacturing. Standardization simplified repairs enormously. The Sherman family shared many common components despite different production variants. Mechanics became thoroughly familiar with their construction. Training schools emphasized interchangeable procedures. Experience accumulated rapidly because thousands of similar vehicles passed through maintenance facilities. German mechanics confronted a far more complicated situation. Germany produced numerous armored fighting vehicles throughout the war. Panzer II, Panzer IV, Panther, Tiger, King Tiger, Jagdpanzer IV, Jagdpanther, Hetzer, Stock II, Stock IV, Elephant, Nashorn, Hummel. Each demanded specialized knowledge. Each required different spare parts. Each introduced unique mechanical challenges. The increasing diversity complicated every repair operation. One German maintenance officer later remarked that his workshop sometimes resembled a museum rather than an organized repair facility. American mechanics benefited from remarkable consistency. Another factor impressed German observers. American recovery doctrine emphasized saving crews as much as vehicles. Sherman crews received extensive instruction regarding emergency evacuation procedures. If a tank became disabled, surviving crew members immediately reported to their unit headquarters whenever possible. Once the vehicle returned from repair, experienced crews often rejoined familiar tanks. This preserved valuable combat experience. German units attempted similar practices whenever circumstances allowed. Unfortunately, catastrophic battlefield conditions increasingly separated crews permanently from their vehicles. Some became infantry replacements after losing tanks. Others transferred between units. The organizational disruption compounded material losses. Recovery vehicles therefore served a broader purpose than towing machinery. They preserved experienced fighting teams. The psychological benefits proved enormous. American tank crews knew that abandonment did not necessarily mean permanent loss. If they escaped alive, there remained a reasonable chance both they and their Sherman would fight again. This confidence encouraged aggressive operations because temporary setbacks appeared survivable. German crews increasingly lacked similar reassurance. Abandoning a Panther frequently meant saying goodbye forever. Even relatively minor mechanical failures sometimes resulted in permanent loss because recovery resources no longer existed. Normandy illustrated these differences dramatically. The dense hedgerow country placed enormous strain upon armored vehicles. Tracks broke, suspension systems suffered constant punishment. Mud trapped tanks attempting off-road movement. Hidden anti-tank obstacles damaged running gear. Mechanical failures occurred almost daily regardless of enemy action. American recovery teams responded continuously. The M32 became almost as familiar a sight behind advancing armored columns as the Sherman itself. One recovery crew might retrieve several damaged tanks during a single night. Their work rarely attracted newspaper photographers. No dramatic headlines celebrated mechanics replacing transmissions beneath camouflage nets. Yet every repaired Sherman represented another combat-ready tank available for tomorrow's offensive. German intelligence gradually recognized the scale of these operations. Reports described American maintenance facilities operating with astonishing efficiency. Captured documents occasionally revealed detailed recovery procedures. Prisoners discussed specialized repair battalions following armored divisions. The evidence pointed toward an uncomfortable conclusion. Destroying Shermans no longer guaranteed reducing American armored strength proportionally. Several German officers began discussing this problem openly. A Panther commander might report knocking out 5 Shermans during an engagement. Traditionally, such success suggested significant weakening of the opposing force. Increasingly, however, American formations returned days later with nearly unchanged strength. Where had the replacements come from? Initially, many assumed fresh tanks arrived directly from ports in Normandy. Certainly some did, but large numbers actually represented repaired vehicles recovered from earlier battles. The battlefield itself had become part of America's maintenance system. German recovery operations painted a starkly different picture. Consider a Panther disabled by a damaged final drive. Mechanically, the problem might prove repairable. Operationally, circumstances often prevented recovery. Fuel shortages limited towing vehicles. Enemy fighter bombers patrolled roads during daylight. Bridges incapable of supporting heavy Panthers complicated transportation. Recovery tractors themselves became increasingly scarce. If Soviet or Allied forces advanced rapidly, there simply might not be enough time. Many German crews therefore received demolition charges. If recovery became impossible, they destroyed their own tanks before retreating. The practice became painfully common during the final year of the war. German veterans later recalled the emotional impact. Months of training, pride in receiving a new Panther or Tiger, confidence in superior engineering, then one mechanical breakdown or damaged transmission ended everything. Watching their own crew ignite demolition charges before walking away proved devastating. Nearby, American recovery crews often labored through the night pulling Shermans toward repair depots. The contrast could hardly have been greater. One German officer summarized the difference with remarkable honesty after the war. He observed that American tanks rarely seemed alone. Even when temporarily abandoned, an invisible army of mechanics appeared ready to rescue them. German tanks increasingly stood alone if they stopped moving. Their chances of survival declined rapidly. The M32 recovery vehicle itself also continued evolving. Crews improvised specialized techniques based upon battlefield experience. Additional tools appeared. Improved towing methods reduced recovery times. Field modifications increased operational efficiency. Recovery personnel shared successful procedures across maintenance battalions, ensuring valuable lessons spread rapidly throughout the American Army. Innovation occurred continuously. One particularly important capability involved engine replacement. Sherman power plants could often be removed and replaced surprisingly quickly compared with many contemporary designs. The M32's boom allowed mechanics to lift damaged engines directly from hull compartments before installing replacement units. What once required extensive workshop equipment now became possible much closer to the front. Every hour saved accelerated the tank's return to combat. German engineers certainly appreciated efficient maintenance. The Panther's design incorporated several advanced engineering concepts admired worldwide. Unfortunately, many major repairs remained extremely labor-intensive. Replacing significant mechanical assemblies often demanded more time, heavier equipment, and greater technical expertise, combined with dwindling resources. Repair times lengthened steadily. By late 1944, the difference between American and German maintenance systems had grown impossible to ignore. American armored divisions advanced with confidence that damaged vehicles would likely return. German divisions increasingly accepted that every disabled tank represented a potential permanent loss. The battlefield had quietly shifted. Victory no longer depended solely upon who fired first or whose gun penetrated thicker armor. It increasingly depended upon which army could restore damaged equipment faster than it was lost. The humble recovery vehicle became central to that contest. Its crew seldom appeared in wartime newsreels. Its missions rarely produced dramatic combat stories. Yet every Sherman it rescued denied German gunners the lasting results they believed they had achieved. While Panther and Tiger crews focused their sights on the American tanks in front of them, another battle was unfolding behind the lines. One fought with steel cables, cranes, welding torches, spare engines, and relentless organization. Before long, German veterans would conclude that defeating American armor required more than destroying Shermans. It required overcoming the vast recovery and maintenance system that kept bringing those Shermans back, a task that had become virtually impossible by the final year of the war. By the autumn of 1944, experienced German tank commanders had begun noticing something that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. American armored divisions absorbed losses that would have crippled almost any other army. Yet they continued advancing with astonishing consistency. During one engagement, German gunners might destroy several Shermans and believe they had significantly weakened an opposing battalion. A week later, intelligence reports would show that same battalion operating with nearly its full complement of tanks. The question became increasingly difficult to answer. Where were all these tanks coming from? Were American factories somehow replacing them overnight? Or was something far more complicated happening behind the front lines? The answer lay in the enormous logistical machine supporting every American armored division. Recovery vehicles represented only the beginning. Behind them stretched a carefully organized chain of maintenance companies, evacuation routes, spare parts depots, transportation units, machine shops, welding teams, and engineers who specialized in restoring damaged vehicles as quickly as possible. German officers slowly realized that they were fighting not merely American tank crews, but an industrial maintenance system unlike anything previously encountered on the battlefield. Normandy provided the first major demonstration. The rapid Allied advance after Operation Cobra left hundreds of disabled vehicles scattered across northern France. Many had been knocked out by German anti-tank guns. Others had struck mines. Some had suffered mechanical failures after weeks of continuous movement across difficult terrain. Still others became trapped in craters, muddy fields, or collapsed bridges. To German observers, these abandoned tanks appeared to represent permanent losses. American recovery crews saw something entirely different. They saw valuable equipment waiting to be reclaimed. Within hours of combat shifting forward, recovery teams began moving across former battlefields. M32 recovery vehicles towed disabled Shermans toward collection points established behind advancing formations. Mechanics performed rapid inspections. Some tanks returned to service after nothing more than replacing damaged tracks or suspension components. Others required new engines or transmissions. Even severely damaged vehicles became sources of spare parts that kept dozens of others operational. Nothing useful was wasted. German maintenance officers admired this efficiency despite fighting against it. Several post-war interviews reveal remarkable professional respect for American recovery doctrine. Former Panther mechanics acknowledged that the United States understood something Germany gradually lost during the war. Keeping existing tanks operational often mattered more than building new ones. This principle became increasingly obvious during the Battle of the Bulge, when Germany launched its final major offensive in December 1944. Armored formations included some of the most formidable tanks ever constructed. Panthers spearheaded attacks. Tiger IIs provided tremendous firepower. Assault guns accompanied infantry formations. Initially, the offensive achieved surprise and considerable success. American units retreated in several sectors. Roads became congested. Confusion spread across parts of the Ardennes. For a brief moment, it appeared Germany had regained operational momentum. Yet beneath the surface, familiar logistical problems soon returned. Fuel shortages reappeared almost immediately. Narrow forest roads became clogged with abandoned vehicles. Mechanical failures accumulated. Recovery units struggled desperately to keep pace. Heavy tanks breaking down along icy roads often blocked entire columns behind them. Every disabled Panther created another obstacle. Every immobilized King Tiger consumed precious fuel and manpower. American forces certainly suffered losses during the Ardennes campaign. Shermans burned in snowy forests. Tank destroyers fell victim to ambushes. Recovery operations became extraordinarily dangerous under constant artillery fire and freezing weather. Yet, the recovery system continued functioning. As German attacks gradually lost momentum, American recovery crews entered battlefields littered with damaged equipment. Once again, Tanks that German crews believed permanently destroyed slowly disappeared from the landscape. Many returned to combat astonishingly quickly. The psychological effect upon German tank crews became significant. Veterans later described the strange feeling of encountering American armored units that seemed almost impossible to reduce in strength. One commander recalled that after a successful engagement, he expected fewer enemy tanks during the next encounter. Instead, the numbers often remained virtually unchanged. He concluded that destroying Shermans resembled attempting to empty a river with a bucket. The flow never seemed to stop, of course. American losses were very real. Thousands of Sherman tanks were destroyed during the war, many never returned to service. The recovery system was not magical. Tanks suffering catastrophic ammunition explosions or severe structural damage often proved beyond repair. Crews were killed or wounded. Factories continued producing replacement vehicles throughout the conflict. Nevertheless, recovery dramatically reduced the number of tanks permanently lost. This distinction mattered enormously. If even 1/3 of disabled tanks returned to combat, the long-term combat strength of an armored division improved dramatically. In many sectors, recovery rates proved even higher. German commanders confronted the opposite reality. The Panther represented perhaps the clearest example. Technically, it ranked among the finest medium tanks of the Second World War. Its powerful 75mm KWK-42 gun possessed exceptional armor penetration. Its sloped frontal armor offered excellent protection. Its optics ranked among the best in the world on paper. It outperformed the Sherman in several important categories. Yet battlefield effectiveness depended upon far more than technical specifications. The Panther remained mechanically demanding. Its final drives and transmissions required careful maintenance. Its weight complicated transportation. Recovery frequently required specialized heavy equipment that Germany increasingly lacked. Consequently, Panthers disabled by relatively moderate mechanical failures often became permanent losses. The irony frustrated German engineers. They had designed an excellent fighting vehicle. The collapsing logistical system prevented that vehicle from reaching its full potential. American recovery personnel understood this weakness instinctively. Captured German vehicles frequently revealed damage that appeared surprisingly minor: broken suspension components, engine failures, transmission problems, fuel exhaustion, mechanical breakdown rather than enemy fire accounted for many abandoned Panthers and Tigers. American intelligence officers carefully studied these wrecks. Their conclusions reinforced existing doctrine. Reliability and recoverability mattered every bit as much as armor thickness or gun power. The contrast became even clearer during the final advance into Germany itself. By early 1945, American armored divisions crossed rivers, captured cities, and advanced hundreds of kilometers within remarkably short periods. Rapid movement naturally produced mechanical wear. Tracks stretched, engines overheated, suspension systems endured tremendous punishment. Ordinarily, such conditions might have crippled armored operations. Instead, recovery units worked almost continuously. Mechanics often repaired tanks overnight. By dawn, many vehicles rejoined advancing columns. The offensive maintained its momentum. German defenders observed this with growing frustration. One day, they knocked out Shermans defending a crossroads. The following day, fresh American tanks occupied the same position. Sometimes they were not even fresh tanks. They were the very same vehicles repaired only hours earlier. Some American crews jokingly referred to recovered Shermans as having earned another life. German soldiers occasionally reached similar conclusions, though with considerably less humor. One German officer later admitted that his men gradually learned to fire additional rounds into disabled Shermans whenever possible. The objective was simple: cause enough destruction to make recovery impossible, destroy the engine, ignite the ammunition, damage the hull beyond practical repair. Merely disabling the tank no longer seemed sufficient. This represented a remarkable shift in battlefield thinking. Instead of asking whether an enemy tank had been knocked out, German crews increasingly asked whether it had been destroyed completely. Even then, certainty proved elusive. American workshops displayed extraordinary ingenuity. Vehicles with badly damaged hulls occasionally donated usable components to other tanks, turrets transferred, engines exchanged, transmission assemblies replaced. One wreck might help restore several damaged vehicles. The recovery system extracted value from almost everything. American mechanics became masters of controlled improvisation. Official maintenance manuals provided detailed procedures. Battlefield experience supplied additional creativity. When standard methods proved impossible, experienced mechanics often developed practical solutions using whatever materials remained available. Field-expedient repairs kept tanks moving until more permanent work became possible. German mechanics demonstrated similar ingenuity. The difference again lay in resources. Creativity could not manufacture unavailable spare parts. It could not produce fuel. It could not replace factories destroyed by bombing. It could not reopen railway lines cut by a light aircraft. By 1945, Germany's logistical crisis overwhelmed even its most talented maintenance personnel. Another factor quietly favored the Americans: crew survival. Although the Sherman has often been criticized for catching fire after penetration, later were improvements such as wet ammunition storage significantly reduced catastrophic fires. Many American crews escaped disabled tanks alive. Once their vehicle reached a repair facility, surviving crew members often returned to familiar equipment after repairs. This continuity preserved combat experience. Experienced crews fought more effectively than inexperienced replacements. German crews frequently escaped as well, but the permanent loss of their tanks often scattered personnel throughout different units. The organizational disruption steadily increased. Military historians today frequently describe logistics as the hidden foundation of victory. Few examples illustrate that principle more clearly than American armored recovery operations. Recovery vehicles seldom appeared in dramatic wartime photographs. Journalists naturally preferred images of tanks firing during combat rather than mechanics replacing transmissions. Movies celebrated battlefield heroics rather than maintenance schedules. Yet professional soldiers often recognized the true significance. General George S.N. Patton himself repeatedly emphasized rapid maintenance and recovery as essential elements of mobile warfare. Advancing quickly meant little if broken vehicles accumulated faster than they could be repaired. His armored formations therefore depended heavily upon recovery units maintaining operational strength. German commanders appreciated Patton's speed. Many failed initially to appreciate the maintenance organization making that speed possible. One captured German report described American logistics as elastic. Whenever losses occurred, the system expanded to absorb them. Replacement parts arrived, recovery teams appeared, repair shops operated continuously. The entire organization displayed remarkable resilience. American armored strength therefore declined much more slowly than German planners expected. By contrast, German logistical flexibility steadily disappeared. Every destroyed bridge complicated transportation. Every fuel depot bombed by a light aircraft reduced operational mobility. Every lost railway junction delayed spare parts. Recovery operations became increasingly hazardous and increasingly unsuccessful. Eventually, many German commanders accepted a painful reality. Their greatest enemy was no longer the Sherman itself. It was everything supporting the Sherman. The tank recovery vehicles symbolized that realization perfectly. They possessed no powerful anti-tank gun. They rarely participated directly in armored battles. Nevertheless, they quietly erased many battlefield victories achieved by German gunners. Professional respect emerged even among opponents. Several German veterans interviewed after the war specifically mentioned American recovery operations when discussing Allied strengths. One former Panther commander remarked that American mechanics seemed to fight with the same determination as their tank crews. Another observed that every destroyed Sherman appeared to have an entire maintenance battalion waiting just beyond the horizon. These comments reflected admiration rather than exaggeration. The recovery system truly had become an extension of the combat force itself. By the spring of 1945, the contrast reached its greatest extent. American armored divisions rolled steadily across Germany with recovery vehicles following close behind, pulling damaged Shermans from roadsides almost as quickly as they fell out of formation. German crews, meanwhile, increasingly abandoned Panthers and Tigers that might once have been saved, simply because no fuel, no heavy tractors, or no secure routes remained to recover them. In the final months of the war, the battle for armored superiority was no longer decided solely by whose gun penetrated thicker armor. It was decided by which army could keep its tanks fighting day after day. That quiet contest, fought by recovery crews armed with tow cables, cranes, and toolboxes instead of cannons, became one of the most overlooked reasons why American armored forces maintained their momentum all the way to the heart of Germany. As the war ended, Thousands of abandoned armored vehicles remained scattered across Europe. Burned out Shermans rested beside French hedgerows. Panthers stood silently in German forests. Tigers blocked narrow village streets where they had broken down or run out of fuel. To civilians returning home, these machines looked like identical relics of destruction. To military engineers and professional soldiers, however, they represented two very different stories. Some had been defeated by enemy fire. Others had been defeated by logistics. When Allied technical teams began studying the battlefield after Germany's surrender, they discovered that one of the greatest differences between the opposing armies had not been found inside the tanks themselves, but in the systems that supported them. American armored divisions had not won because every Sherman was superior to every Panther or Tiger. Even American officers freely admitted this. The Panther's main gun generally possessed greater armor penetration. Its sloped frontal armor offered excellent protection. The Tiger's famous 88mm cannon remained one of the most feared weapons of the war. When comparing individual vehicles under ideal conditions, German tanks frequently demonstrated impressive advantages. Yet war rarely provided ideal conditions. A tank existed within a much larger system. It required fuel. It required ammunition. It required spare parts. It required trained mechanics. It required transportation. It required recovery vehicles capable of rescuing it after damage. The United States excelled in building that entire system. The M32 recovery vehicle became one of its clearest symbols following Germany's surrender. Allied intelligence officers questioned hundreds of German tank commanders, mechanics, maintenance officers, and logistics specialists. These interviews focused not only on German equipment, but also on Allied strengths and weaknesses. The answers proved remarkably consistent, again and again. German veterans praised American logistics. Some remained critical of the Sherman's armor. Others believed German optics remained superior. Many continued arguing that Panthers possessed greater battlefield potential. Yet, when discussing why Germany ultimately lost the armored war, their attention repeatedly shifted away from guns and armor toward maintenance and recovery. One former maintenance officer summarized the issue with striking honesty. He explained that Germany often built outstanding tanks but increasingly lacked the ability to keep them operational. America, meanwhile, built very good tanks and almost always managed to return them to service. The distinction shaped entire campaigns. Military historians studying post-war records reached similar conclusions. Operational research teams examined thousands of maintenance reports collected during the war. The numbers revealed something remarkable. Large percentages of American tanks classified as battlefield losses eventually returned to service after repair. Some required only minor mechanical work. Others underwent complete rebuilding. Still others donated components that restored additional vehicles. Recovery prevented enormous quantities of equipment from becoming permanent losses. The savings extended far beyond machinery. Every repaired Sherman preserved transportation capacity. Factories could concentrate on expanding armored strength instead of merely replacing destroyed vehicles. Experienced crews frequently rejoined repaired tanks. Maintenance units accumulated expertise with every successful recovery. The entire system became increasingly efficient as the war progressed. Germany moved in the opposite direction. Early war recovery operations had often succeeded. By 1945, the same procedures proved almost impossible. Fuel shortages stranded towing vehicles, bombed railways delayed heavy equipment. Destroyed bridges complicated transportation. Mechanics lacked replacement parts. Workshops themselves became targets for Allied aircraft. Recovery doctrine remained sound. Circumstances no longer allowed its successful execution. One revealing statistic emerged from late war battlefield surveys. Large numbers of German armored vehicles abandoned during the final months displayed surprisingly limited combat damage. Some had suffered broken transmissions. Others experienced engine failures. Several simply ran out of fuel. Many, theoretically, could have fought again had recovery resources remained available. Instead, their crews destroyed them before retreating. American recovery teams examined these wrecks carefully. They often concluded similar vehicles within American service would almost certainly have been repaired. This realization deeply influenced post-war military planning. The United States Army carefully studied every aspect of wartime armored operations. Recovery doctrine received particular attention. Military planners recognized that armored warfare would continue evolving. But one lesson appeared timeless. A disabled tank should never be considered lost until every reasonable recovery effort had failed. The M32 therefore influenced future generations of recovery vehicles. Its basic philosophy survived long after the Second World War ended. Specialized armored recovery vehicles accompanied American forces during the Korean War. Improved designs appeared throughout the Cold War. Modern-made battle tanks weighing more than 60 or even 70 tons still operate alongside dedicated recovery vehicles descended directly from wartime concepts first demonstrated on European battlefields. Today's armored recovery vehicles possess cranes capable of lifting entire power packs, computerized diagnostic equipment, advanced winches, and powerful engines. Yet their essential mission remains unchanged: recover damaged tanks, repair them, return them to combat. The same principle continues guiding armored warfare nearly a century later. Former German officers acknowledged this evolution with professional respect. Several participated in rebuilding West Germany's armed forces during the 1950s. When helping establish the Bundeswehr, they emphasized maintenance planning far more heavily than had often been possible during the final years of the Third Reich. Experience had taught painful lessons. Modern armored forces required recovery units integrated from the beginning rather than treated as secondary support organizations. NATO itself eventually adopted similar concepts, was after 1945 repeatedly confirmed the importance of recovery. During Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, and the Gulf War, armored recovery vehicles quietly followed combat formations just as M32 crews had followed Shermans across France. Technology changed, doctrine evolved. The principle endured. Professional armies recovered damaged equipment whenever possible because replacing entire vehicles remained slower, more expensive, and strategically inefficient. Ironically, these recovery vehicles rarely entered popular culture. Movies celebrated dramatic tank battles. Documentaries often focused upon Tigers, Panthers, Shermans, or Pershings. Recovery crews appeared only briefly, if at all, yet soldiers who actually served in armored units understood their value immediately. Tank crews frequently joked that recovery personnel were the people they most hoped to see after being knocked out. The arrival of a recovery vehicle often meant survival not only for the tank, but for the crew's future participation in the campaign. American veterans later described the extraordinary efforts made by recovery teams. Some crews worked continuously for 24 hours or longer after major battles. Mechanics repaired tanks beneath camouflage nets while artillery still echoed in the distance. Recovery operators ventured into recently contested ground where mines remained uncleared. Many received decorations for bravery despite rarely engaging directly with enemy forces. Their courage simply took a different form. Instead of charging enemy positions, they entered dangerous battlefields after everyone else had left. Several accounts describe recovery crews operating under sniper fire while attaching towing cables. Others recalled working through freezing winter nights during the Battle of the Bulge, repairing Shermans with numb hands as temperatures dropped far below freezing. Mud became another constant enemy. Northern France, Belgium, and Western Germany frequently transformed into vast seas of mud after heavy rain. Even recovery vehicles occasionally became stuck while attempting to rescue disabled tanks. When that happened, additional recovery vehicles sometimes rescued the original recovery vehicle before returning to the disabled Sherman. The logistical chain never stopped functioning. Every obstacle demanded another solution. German veterans gradually recognized that this persistence itself represented a weapon. Not a weapon firing shells, a weapon preserving combat power. One former Panther commander remarked decades after the war that American recovery operations made every Allied armored division feel larger than it actually was. He explained that German crews could never be certain whether tanks appearing during today's battle represented fresh reinforcements or repaired vehicles destroyed only days earlier. The uncertainty complicated operational planning. Intelligence estimates became less reliable. Success proved harder to measure. Destroying enemy tanks traditionally weakened future resistance against American forces. That relationship became less predictable. Military analysts eventually developed the concept of operational availability. The term refers not to how many vehicles an army owns, but how many remain ready for immediate combat. This distinction perfectly explains the importance of recovery vehicles. Suppose two armies each possess 100 tanks. Army A permanently loses every disabled tank. Army B recovers and repairs half its disabled vehicles after several weeks of combat. Army B almost certainly maintains significantly greater operational strength despite beginning with identical numbers. Recovery quietly multiplies combat effectiveness without firing a single shot. That is exactly what American armored recovery doctrine accomplished during the Second World War. German engineers certainly appreciated mechanical excellence. Many of their wartime designs remain admired by historians and armored specialists today. Yet engineering brilliance could not overcome collapsing logistics. The finest tank ever built contributes nothing if abandoned beside a road awaiting fuel that never arrives. The most powerful gun becomes irrelevant if transmission failure immobilizes the vehicle beyond recovery. America avoided many of these problems through overwhelming industrial capacity combined with disciplined logistical planning. The M32 recovery vehicle symbolized that advantage more clearly than perhaps any other support vehicle of the war. Even modern military academies continue teaching similar lessons. Students studying armored warfare examine not only famous battles, but also maintenance reports, recovery statistics, supply chains, and operational readiness. They learn that logistics determines how long armies continue fighting after initial enthusiasm fades. Recovery vehicles occupy an essential place within that education. History repeatedly demonstrates their importance. Looking back today, it becomes clear why experienced German tank crews gradually developed unusual respect for American recovery vehicles. They did not fear them because they carried enormous guns. They did not fear them because they possessed unusually thick armor. They feared what they represented. Every M32 arriving behind American lines signaled another opportunity for damaged Shermans to return. Every successful recovery reduced the lasting impact of German battlefield victories. Every repaired tank meant another dangerous opponent waiting somewhere beyond the next hill. In many ways, the recovery vehicle embodied the greatest strength of the American war effort. It reflected patience over desperation, organization over improvisation, standardization over complexity, industrial endurance over short-term brilliance. These qualities rarely produce dramatic photographs. They seldom become legendary battlefield stories. Yet they decide wars. When historians ask why Allied armored forces maintained their momentum from Normandy to the Elbe while German armored strength steadily declined, the answer extends far beyond famous tanks like the Sherman, Panther, or Tiger. Hidden behind those celebrated machines was an army of recovery crews, mechanics, engineers, welders, drivers, and logistics specialists who quietly transformed damaged vehicles into combat-ready weapons again and again. Their work denied German crews the permanent victories they believed they had earned. That is why many German veterans came to respect and in some cases genuinely dread the appearance of American recovery vehicles. They understood that destroying a Sherman was often only half the battle. Unless the damage was catastrophic or the battlefield remained firmly under German control, there was always the possibility that an M32 recovery vehicle would arrive after dark, attach its steel cables, tow the crippled tank to a repair depot, replace whatever had been broken, and send it back into combat. The next time a German gunner looked through his telescopic sight, he might once again find himself aiming at a Sherman that should have been gone forever. In that sense, the humble recovery vehicle became one of the most underestimated force multipliers of the Second World War, not because it destroyed enemy tanks, but because it quietly ensured that American tanks kept coming back until the war itself was won.